All right, so good afternoon, everyone. My name is Colleen Armstrong. My pronouns are she and her. I am the Prevention and Education Coordinator with Fairfax County's Domestic and Sexual Violence Services. And I'm really excited to kind of be a part of this series that has been like so wonderful and so informative and such a nice way for us to be connected regionally in October, even though we can't kind of gather in some of our more traditional spaces and traditional events this year. So our focus today is going to be really thinking about living safer at the intersection of technology and intimate partner violence. So beginning to understand the ways in which technology is used and, more importantly, misused in the perpetration of intimate partner violence. What are some of the more common ways and places that we're seeing technology pop up as a tool of intimate partner violence? And then kind of ultimately how we can support survivors in safety planning on using these tools in safer ways or in ways that maximize their safety. So definitely going to love to hear kind of questions, comments. Please feel free. Candace is very generously going to help me out in monitoring the chat. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat, to use the raise hand function if it's easier for you to ask a question out loud or verbally than it is to type it out. And I will say I have a pen and a piece of paper here with me. What I will also commit to doing is if there's a question that's just not going to be something that we're going to get to today, or it's a little bit more detailed or in depth, or I need to do a little bit of digging for a resource for you, I will go ahead and throw it on my piece of paper, bike rack, parking lot, junk drawer, kind of whatever you want to call it, and we'll find a way to get you that information. So without kind of further ado, let's go ahead and jump on into this. So like I had said, I'm with the Fairfax County's Domestic and Sexual Violence Services. So we are under the umbrella of Fairfax County's Department of Family Services. So when we talk about technology-facilitated intimate partner violence, which is our focus for today, what we're really thinking about and what we want to be thinking about and focusing and honing in on is the way in which technology can be used and misused to facilitate or perpetrate behaviors that contribute to a pattern of power and control over a current or former intimate partner. So a couple of reasons why I want to offer this definition up front and to frame our conversation around this is a couple things. One, it really drives home for us the fact that technology is not causing domestic violence. We sometimes will in conversation, or we sometimes will hear this idea of, oh, well, if somebody got rid of their cell phone or got a different phone number or deleted their Facebook account, then this wouldn't be an issue for them. But what we want to recognize is that if it's a couple things. One, we want to recognize that those dynamics of power and control would be present in that situation regardless of access to technology. We'll talk a little bit later on about the non-consensual distribution of intimate images, kind of colloquially known as revenge porn. And the number of times I've heard folks say, well, the way to prevent this, is to not share photos of yourself through technology, because that's what's creating this problem. There is a case out of I want to say it's the Pacific Northwest from the mid-1990s, where somebody took photos on film on a camera, took it to a place to get had intimate images of his former partner, took it to a place to get the photos developed. So left his home, drove to, like, I'm assuming it's like a kiosk for those who remember those, right? Drove him to a kiosk to get the photos developed, and then took himself to the post office where he physically mailed the photos of his partner to her family, to her friends, to her work. And so this was happening, and this was like pre-camera phones with the ability to text. So what we want to make sure we're understanding is that the behaviors that are existing can be facilitated by technology. Technology can make them easier to do or easier to do at a distance, but technology is not creating the issue. What we are seeing is that it is allowing it to happen at a distance. And I would also say, kind of on the positive side, at times for survivors, is sometimes the use of technology creates evidence that this is happening. Creates chains of text messages, phone records, social media posts, where before, if it was a face-to-face, like verbal threat, or something of that nature, we might not have the same level of evidence, or it might create challenges to collect that evidence about that. So when we think about the ways in which that power and control, that violence manifests in relationship, we want to think about how technology can overlay all of the different ways that violence can manifest, domestic violence can manifest in a relationship. I know some of these are ones that were addressed in previous weeks, but wanting us to think about how somebody could use technology to facilitate these forms of violence. So if folks can share in the chat or raise their hands, either one is great. I've got the chat open. I can keep an eye on it, Candace, for right now. But for physical violence, if somebody's experiencing physical abuse, how could a partner use technology to facilitate those acts of violence? Tracking location, absolutely, right? So to physically show up, to be able to facilitate the physical assault, absolutely, they could track their location. How else with physical? Actually impacting the physical environment, great. So like Nest thermostats, smart home devices, we're going to talk a lot more about that a little bit later on, but actually physically impacting somebody's physical environment. Particularly if somebody is vulnerable around extreme heat or extreme cold, this could be really dangerous. A couple other ones that folks may not think about, we're going to talk some about this a little bit later on, but it's using tech to facilitate third parties to cause the harm. So using apps, meetup apps, dating apps to arrange for folks to come and physically harm. Offenders provoking their partners into a rage because of something they said and then recording the response to that. Yes. Turning cameras on in the home. Great, right? So we're thinking about, these are things that would exist or could happen, right? Impacting the physical environment, causing somebody harm, inciting somebody to violence, and then using it against them to say like, well, actually you're the abusive person because you responded to my incitement to violence. Are all circumstances or dynamics that exist outside of technology, but technology can facilitate those pieces. What about emotional and or verbal abuse? How could technology facilitate an abusive partner's use of those forms of violence? Deleting texts or emails to gaslight a partner and make them question reality? Absolutely. This is also something too, we'll see partners like cancel appointments. So if there's like a confirmation email or like a click here, respond to this text to confirm your appointment, abusive partners using that to cancel appointments or move appointment times. And then survivors saying like, I had an appointment today. I said, no, you didn't, you canceled it. Oh, I did I? Right, and that being a part of the gaslighting. Absolutely, really impactful. Sending social media messages on a partner's behalf to turn loved ones against them. So creating fake profiles, using somebody's passwords, hacking or guessing someone's account password, and then posing as them. Deleting family contacts or friends contacts to further isolate them. I mean, I realistically, how many of the numbers that we have in our phones that we use all the time do we actually have memorized now? Or we've had to explicitly make part of safety planning, like memorize folks' phone numbers because you may not have access to your phone because we just don't maybe have to dial folks' numbers as often anymore. We can just pull them up. So how can technology be used to facilitate sexual violence in an intimate partner relationship? Recordings of unwanted sexual acts and using those to blackmail? Absolutely. Forcing someone to watch sexually explicit materials? Posting explicit photos? For anyone who was, or for folks who maybe were a part of the reproductive coercion training and the reproductive justice training a couple of weeks back, it was what, like 4 weeks ago, but somehow like 6 months ago, with time being as wonky as it is this year, how could technology actually facilitate some forms of reproductive coercion? So some other ideas or other ways that tech can facilitate sexual violence is recording them undressing in the bathroom or in the bathroom without their consent, putting names and numbers up on solicitation sites, body shaming. Absolutely. Something that I've seen a handful of times with survivors that I have worked with was partners using who were engaging in reproductive coercion, like using health monitoring apps or period monitoring apps for if their partner was, if the survivor was somebody who menstruated, if just like in the chat, right, using an app to track their reproductive cycle if they're trying to force or coerce pregnancy, canceling birth control prescriptions on their behalf. Absolutely. So, you know, just thinking again about these are pieces that exist and would exist even if the cell phone had never been invented and we weren't all living on Zoom right now in this moment. What about financial abuse? How can financial abuse manifest? How can technology facilitate the manifestations around financial abuse? Running up credit card debt in their name, right? Absolutely, like through online shopping or through saved credit card information on websites. Creating an environment of dependency, getting access to their bank account and transferring money to an abuser via apps like Venmo. Yeah, absolutely. And the other piece, eventually I'm going to add Venmo to this presentation in its own way, because the other thing too folks don't realize is you can see not amounts necessarily, but the default setting on Venmo is public. So if you are friends with somebody on Venmo, like you can see their transaction history. So you can see not how much they're sending, but who they're sending money to. And so it can also be used to monitor that, right? If part of the plan for a survivor maybe to leave the relationship is to like send small amounts of money to friends and family so they can kind of have that nest egg ready to go for themselves. Is that actually going to be more dangerous, or do we need to make sure those transactions are set to private so not anybody can see it? It is not necessarily financial abuse, but it is a little tongue-in-cheek when we say that the last couple seasons of The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, people were actually accurately able to predict who was going to win those based off the Venmo transaction history between contestants. And so that is very real. So I'm going to, like I said, add a whole bunch of slides about Venmo and Cash App and PayPal to this presentation because it is really just pieces to think about. Locking somebody out of their bank account so they can't access it, locking them out of payments for websites, for utilities and rent, access to accounts, and tracking where and when money is spent. Absolutely. The other piece we want to think about too, we're going to talk about passwords and security questions too, but also to think about like how just hold how easy it would actually be for somebody to get into an online account. It's incredibly easy. And the other thing too is posting somebody's personal financial information on websites, so it facilitates identity theft. So maybe the abuser is not actually spending the money, but they're posting through Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, places like that. They're posting the survivor's debit card information, which then facilitates other folks to commit identity theft. And then finally, when we think about like cultural, right? So when we think about like all of the pieces that make you, right? Cultural or religious or spiritual, all of those pieces, how could somebody use technology and weaponize the use of technology against a partner? When we think about cultural abuse, spiritual abuse. For LGBTQ folks, adding them on social media, absolutely. Making them use technology on Shabbat for religious Jewish clients. So yeah, so forcing them to engage in technology use on Shabbat, especially if it is connected to like social media. So then it's really public. And then there's this additional element within that context of not only as the abuser forcing the survivor to engage in a religious practice and to act against their religious practice, but it's also public for the community to see. That form of abuse. During COVID, preventing them from attending virtual service, using social media to pressure the victim into staying with an abuser, preventing acculturation through language to prevent seeking help. If they are part of an online community related to religious identity, shaming them or spreading lies, threatening to tell family, absolutely. I worked with a survivor who her spirituality was a big part of her life, and she found a lot of strength and resilience in her religious identity. And she was really cautious about what she posted, where she posted, got rid of most of her social media, had very candid conversations with friends and family about her own safety, in terms of, you know, please don't tag me in photos, please don't geotag me, all of these different pieces. And the one place she forgot to block, or she didn't realize, actually not even forgot, she didn't think about blocking her abuser of, so she used an app that was like a daily scripture, daily motivational app. And so she would open that and read that every day and kind of journal and think about, you know, how that connected to her life and to her identity. And her abuser found her on that app because the app had a feature where you could like send and share those pieces of scriptures with other folks using the app. And so he began to send her daily scriptures. He began to send her pieces of scripture that related to kind of the murder or punishment for adulterous women, and the pieces of scripture that he was sending to her were all related to kind of capital punishment, so to speak. And so functionally sending threats, right? But that idea too of using not only her religious beliefs against her, but how technology in the form of something that she had found a lot of resilience and strength in was being weaponized against her. So when we look at the ways in which technology is used, and the places that we see, and the use and the misuse of technology we see it overwhelmingly for folks who have experienced, this is domestic violence, contact violence, physical violence, contact sexual violence, and stalking behaviors. The pieces that we see, right, we see a lot of phone calls, emails, texts, unwanted calls, leaving unwanted voicemails or texts, and then actually monitoring the victim or the survivor. So these are probably really familiar tactics to a lot of us, or really familiar experiences based on the survivors that we have worked with, to say that, you know, we're probably currently thinking about folks, if we have a caseload, that are on our caseload that are managing and navigating a ton of unwanted text messages right now, or are really worried about thinking through how they maximize their safety around social media use, or how they can, you know, continue to keep themselves as safe as possible while filtering out some of these behaviors. But again, I really want to reiterate that it is not the technology that is causing these behaviors. because that unwanted contact, that persistent contact, that stalking behavior would persist even if we had never invented cell phones. Even if Zoom wasn't a thing, we would still be seeing these behaviors. So I'm going to show a short video. This is based on an Apple iPhone ad campaign probably 5 or 6 years ago. So folks may remember sound of seeing commercials like this. It is a tongue-in-cheek parody. It was so just to say, this itself was never like part of Apple's actual campaign. So at the end of it, please no angry emails to Apple about their ad campaign.
What's great about the iPhone is that if you want to know where your ex-girlfriend is at any moment, there's an app for that. Or if you want to check her personal calendar so you can accidentally run into her and give her a chance to take you back, there's an app for that. And if you want to set up automatic late-night calls so she knows you're always thinking about her, well, there's an app for that. And if you need an attorney with a proven record of fighting restraining orders, there's an app for that. But if the judge can't appreciate your love for her and you're required by state law to move on, there's an app for that. And if you need to buy a car with enough horsepower to drive off a cliff so that she comes to your funeral and gives a eulogy about what a great guy you were, and then breaks down and cries as she realizes that no other man will ever make her as happy as you did, and that now she's destined to die a lonely old cat lady because she was too stupid to see what she had when it was right in front of her, yeah, there's an app for that too. That's the iPhone, solving life's dilemmas, one app at a time.
So again, a very tongue-in-cheek piece, but kind of highlighting the ways in which technology could be misused to facilitate these. And that's kind of where we're going to go back and forth about today. Is we're going to talk a little bit for the remainder of our time, about some pieces of technology or software that are really explicitly designed to facilitate monitoring, designed to facilitate surveilling someone, designed to facilitate those power and control behaviors. And that those apps or those pieces were very explicitly designed with those in mind. They're very often marketed as something different, but the intent is to facilitate those behaviors. But just as commonly, if not more commonly, what we're going to see is the misuse of technology. So somebody taking pieces of tech, pieces of software, pieces of hardware, and using them for purposes other than what they were intended to do. I say this in a very tongue-in-cheek way, but I always makes me think of that line for Jurassic Park, right? Where it's, you were so preoccupied with whether or not you could, you never stopped to think with whether or not you should, about the scientists. When I see like a new smart device, or like this thing is internet connect, your sink can now be connected to the internet. Okay, and also where are the potential applications, the potential for misuse of that technology in the context of domestic or sexual violence. So this is kind of big picture, the pieces we're going to be talking about today. We're going to kind of talk through some of these, the more popular ones. We're not going to have enough time. It would be multi-day to really do a deep dive. So we're going to talk about some of the more common ones. I will find folks, if you would like, I know for kind of social media and social networking sites, like we're not going to talk as deeply about Venmo, like we already mentioned. I don't have TikTok on here yet. So I don't have some of these pieces, but what we are going to do, or make sure that we do, is talk about some of the more popular ones generally, and then I can always connect folks with kind of resources to dig a little deeper about those if they would like. So again, when we think about cell phones, they've so just become a part of our everyday lives. We are working on our phones, we are schooling from our phones, we are connecting with friends and family for birthdays, happy hours, dinners, in ways that we weren't 7 or 8 months ago using our phones for. But we want to think about our phones as software that can call, that can text, and how settings on our phones can be manipulated to provide access to the victim or to the survivor. So a couple things that it can do, there are ways to turn the phone into a listening device. So there are apps that can be downloaded to the phone that essentially turn your microphone into a speaker, and so somebody can listen in. So a couple things to note about those. Generally speaking, they require physical access to the phone to install. So if you are working with a survivor that your abusive partner has never had access to the cell phone that they currently have, they bought it from a store, took it out of a box, or the only one that's ever had it, more likely than not, they probably don't have that on there. The other thing too that you will see or hear is the microphone is not designed to be on for that purpose that long. So if they're reporting random like crackling noises or interference on their phone when their phone is just sitting there next to them, that is a sign that there's potentially an app like that on their phone. And then finally, if they're experiencing massive battery drains, all of a sudden out of nowhere. So I'm talking like get up in the morning, phone is at 100%, unplug their phone, don't touch it besides unplugging it, take a shower, get out, and the battery is at 10%. And that just started happening all of a sudden. And now the abusive partner has access to information that like they wouldn't have otherwise. We may want to consider that as a potential piece. We'll talk a little bit about like how somebody might make a decision about what they do in that situation in a couple minutes. The other piece too is that since the early 2000s, every single phone sold in the United States, even a flip phone, is equipped with GPS tracking technology, and it's to facilitate 911 calls so that 911 operators and 911 systems are able to identify where callers physically are should somebody be on a cell phone and need to call 911. So what that then means is there's the potential to misuse that GPS feature to monitor or surveil a survivor. But I have heard, or sometimes folks will say, well, just get rid of your iPhone, get rid of your Android, just buy a flip phone. They won't be able to track you that way. That is not entirely true. Even that flip phone has GPS monitoring ability because of FCC, Federal Communications Commission guidelines. One thing that we see a lot of, or that folks see a lot of, and that survivors that you've worked with have probably experienced, is something called call spoofing. So what call spoofing is it is apps that let you make it appear, let's allow somebody to make it appear as if a call is coming from another person. So you have actually probably experienced this with spam calls on your cell phone. If you have ever gotten a call and it's popped up and it says like IRS, and you're like, what is this? Or it pops up and it's like 1 or 2 digits off from like your phone number. So if your phone number is like 555-1234, and all of a sudden you're getting a phone number from like 555-1235, or pieces like that, that is call spoofing. So it lets the number that appears on somebody's caller ID look different than the number that's actually calling. So what you might have heard from survivors is, I last night got 50 phone calls from my sister. And when I called my sister and said, why did you call me 50 times? My sister said, I didn't call you at all. And I just know it's my abuser. I just know it's my abuser and it's a violation of the protective order. But how do I prove it? How do I go? I can't go to, who do I go to and show my cell phone and say, yeah, I know there's 50 calls from my sister here, but it's not really my sister. It's my abusive partner and it's a violation of the protective order. Or it's an escalation because they haven't been in contact with me for a while. There are ways to document it. We're going to talk about it in a second. I will just say there's sometimes an initial reaction of like, well, shouldn't call spoofing be illegal? In and of itself, the use of a call spoofing app is not illegal. They are marketed sometimes as prank apps, like make your friends think like, they're getting called by a celebrity, or they are marketed to, spoof card is one of the more common ones, and it's called spoof card because it literally used to be like a calling card before smartphones. And so they marketed it as for folks who worked out in the field, or we're doing a lot of like visits, like salespeople, that they could use it to set it up so they could like check their voicemail systems, get a voicemail for somebody, and then call somebody back from like a random payphone, but have it show up potentially on like a caller ID as their office, so somebody didn't know that they were calling from like the road or from that check-in. So call spoofing in and of itself is not a crime. It is, however, a violation of Federal Trade Commission regulations to use it in the perpetration of a crime. And crimes would include domestic or sexual violence. So it is more likely than not an individual crime, but it could be something that could be reported to the FTC. And there could be monetary damages associated with that, because it is typically one count per incident. There have been a couple cases that have gone through the FTC in the last like 5 or 6 years that have actually resulted not for jail time, but for substantial fines for folks using it to perpetrate domestic violence and stalking. So a couple ways we can document spoofing. We're going to need to get phone records or call history logs. So I'm going to want, if I am the survivor, I'm going to want mine. I'm going to want the friend that said they were calling. And if I have access to them, the person I think who is spoofing my number. So if I think it's my former partner, if I think it's their new partner, if I think it's a family member, if I can get access to that person's phone records, that's great. But if not, I hopefully can get access to the records of the person that they're posing as. So my friend, my sister, my family member, in that way. So what we're going to be able to then see is that my phone records show, because it will show up on my call log, that my sister called me. But when they look at my sister's phone records, my sister's call log, they're not going to show any calls. If we can then get that third party, that the abusers, the offenders' records, we can maybe able to see at those same time a call to like a really, really long, wonky number. Sometimes if you call that number, depending on the spoofing service that's being used, you'll get like an error message that like, this is spoof card, like you dialed the wrong number. The other piece too, other ways we can kind of prove that this might exist that can be helpful for a survivor if they're looking to report, is if an offender is really, really committed to this, it's going to cost them money. You are going to have to pay for the app. My suggestion is that actually, if you feel comfortable with it, download Spoof Card on your phone and play around with it a little bit so you can understand it and see how it works. And you actually get a few free calls, but you get like 4 or 5 free calls. So you can see that it would take some like financial commitment and money out of pocket to do this as somebody's doing it regularly. So we might be able to see if there's like shared bank records. We might be able to see that this is the person who's paying for this monthly. The other thing too is if there's physical access to the phone, take a screenshot to show that they have that app on their phone. If they're able to get and send that to themselves and save it, if they are able to safely get access to that person's phone. If the harassment is happening over text message, a couple things that we want to do is consider asking for kind of detailed copies of phone bills if somebody is getting texts, not so much iMessages, because those go over Wi-Fi, but texts. We ask for that. We can get some documentation that those were happening to at least prove that they were happening if they no longer have the texts themselves. Couple ways we can record text message information. We can download a screen recorder app, and that will record what is actually like being showed on the phone screen and scroll through the text slowly so you can show continuity. That's going to be what's really important, is showing that this was all one text chain and that things weren't selectively edited. There are also apps too that are really great that are both available with iPhone and Android, are Stitch It and Taylor, and they let you create basically like take multiple pictures and create like one long thread. A suggestion that I have if you are working with somebody and that is what they're going to do in terms of their recording is when they screenshot the text, the last text on one screenshot should be the first text on the next screenshot, because that's going to again show that continuity. That's going to be really important, that is one long conversation that is happening and that it's not being selectively edited. So I had mentioned that all phones that you're going to find in the United States for purchase today have GPS capability on it, but so many things have GPS on them now. I think my personal favorite is the fact that like Life Alert now has a GPS on it, right? The I've fallen and I can't get up now has GPS function. Because what if you, and right, really actually great practical purpose. What if you fall? What if your loved one that you're concerned about goes for a walk outside of their house and they fall and they hit their button, but they're not able to say where they are? We want that ability to find them and provide them with medical care. But all of these are GPS devices that are open themselves up to the possibility of misuse, right? So we see GPS trackers on dog collars. So if your dog gets lost, you can find your dog. For folks who maybe have teenagers or teenage drivers, there are apps that will say, like, if you put this into your, they typically plug into like the diagnostic port on a car. If you put this in there, you'll be able to see where your teen is. Are they driving safely? How fast are they going? Where are they going? Again, marketed around teen driver safety. But when was the last time a lot of us checked the diagnostic port on our car to make sure nothing was inserted there? Similarly, a lot of car insurance companies offer these as a way of getting a discount on your car insurance. But then you're able to, through an online portal, see like date and time, where you went, how far you were driving, how long you were driving for, and all of that information being opened up to misuse as well. Something that does exist as well that we want to be really cognizant of is this idea of geotagging. So functionally, any camera that is connected to the internet or has the ability to connect to Wi-Fi has the ability to also contain GPS information, and those two things together produce a photo that's got what we call a geotag. So geotags informations include things like where the photo was taken. It's included in the EXIF data for the phone, for the photo. So EXIF data is all of the metadata for the photo. That's date, time, location, GPS coordinates. For folks who are photographers, I'm told, I'm not a photographer. If there are any photographers or folks for whom photography is an interest or a passion of yours, please correct me in the chat if I am misunderstanding this. But my understanding of it is that it also tells you things like light exposure, shutter speed, pieces about lens, which are really, really helpful to know if you're looking at a photo as a photographer going, wow, I wonder how they took this photo. What went into taking this photo? But all of that information is contained in that photo file. And there are EXIF data viewer apps and websites that will pull all of that information. So what does that look like? What does that mean? So this is me. I was working on a presentation. This is a while back. Well, actually, you're going to know when it is in a minute. But if I'm being really, really cautious about posting photos of myself online, I might think, if I'm making that decision, this isn't a bad photo for me to post online of myself. I could be anywhere, right? It kind of looks like it's an office, but there's no identifying information. There's no logos on the walls. There's no addresses. I'm not near like a window where you might be able to look outside and recognize landmarks. There's nothing in there that indicates date and time. And so if you're working with a survivor, maybe they're saying, you know, I want to send photos of the kids. Or I want to, you know, I need to let them know about this piece of information, like that they got this piece of mail. I just want to send them a photo of this piece of mail and ask them what they want done with it. They might be thinking about these pieces, right? So this would be a really safe photo to send. I could kind of be anywhere in the world. But what I did not do with this photo is strip the EXIF data. So if I were to send this photo to somebody and they were to run it through an EXIF data viewer, here's all the information that they would get. So this photo was taken about 1.5 years ago, a little bit less. It was taken on my iPhone 6, which I very recently got rid of. And there's literal GPS coordinates for where this photo was taken. It was taken at the Highlands South County Government Building here in Fairfax. And that's all contain this information. You literally go to the pictomap.com, drag a photo in, drop the photo, and it pulls this EXIF data. So we want to just think really carefully and make sure that folks know that that is a possibility. Some good news about sharing photos and EXIF data, though, is that a lot of sites, if somebody is using a site to post a photo, that EXIF data is more likely than not stripped. So if you upload a photo to Facebook, to Twitter, share a photo through WhatsApp or Instagram, those sites strip the EXIF data automatically. So somebody does not need to disable those settings on their phone. If they're sharing and posting photos through there, you cannot get the EXIF data that way. Other safety concerns we're going to talk about in a minute, but not the EXIF data. If somebody is selling items on Craigslist or eBay, if that's an income generating tool for them and they'd like to continue to do that, those sites also strip that EXIF data. So if they are wanting to be, sell some items, they want to be really careful to make sure that they're not revealing their location or that somebody would be able to figure out where they are. If they post those photos on eBay or on Craigslist, both of those sites pull that EXIF data. So if somebody were to run it through that viewer, they would just get like EXIF data not available for this photo as the message. Where EXIF data is not stripped are basically through photo sharing sites, cloud accounts, Dropbox, Google Photo, AirDrop. If somebody airdrops a photo to somebody else on an iPhone or shares a photo through iCloud, that EXIF data is still there unless it is disabled from the phone, or if photos are emailed, that EXIF data could still be available. So we want to just be having conversations with our clients. Have you turned off the EXIF data in their phone? I'm not going to give specific instructions about how to do that because it's slightly different for every phone, and it sometimes changes with software updates. But if you Google the make and model of the phone and turn off EXIF data, you can find for pretty much every single phone incredibly detailed how-tos to do that. And so if that information is turned off, it does not generate the EXIF data with the photo. And then if they send that to somebody, they can't pull that information. Very often when we think about spyware, we think about something that's being installed with the purpose of monitoring and surveillance. So a couple things to note about spyware. We are seeing, like nationally, folks are starting to report seeing increased uses of spyware with COVID and with lockdowns. That the other ways in which somebody may have been monitoring their partner or surveilling their partner are no longer available to them because of COVID. And so now they are turning to spyware apps. A couple things to note, generally speaking, to install a spyware app, you need physical access to the device. So if somebody is using a brand new device that the abuser has never had access to, we want to be cautious, we want to be careful, we want to talk about risks, and also it is less likely that it is a hard piece of software. It's a piece of software that's been installed on their computer. Our spyware apps are, generally speaking, especially on phones, like pretty covert. So they're designed to run in the background. They look like a second flashlight app, a second calculator app. They're not prominent on the phone. Then there's also what gets used as spyware, but was not intended to be spyware, is what we would call a dual purpose app. So these are apps that were like Find My iPhone, Find My Friends, location sharing, Life 360, that were designed with legitimate purpose. Where is my iPhone? If we're all, in times where we could travel, if we were all getting to somewhere at a different time, maybe we shared locations with each other so we would know when we got there. But they can be repurposed by somebody who's using them to stalk or using them to harass or using them to engage in domestic violence behaviors. And I think we need to be really honest. How many of our home screens look like this? Would we notice a new app on their phones? The piece, and again, so this will get updated eventually with these pieces, but for iPhone users, the newest iPhone update, the newest iPhone software update lets you kind of customize your home screen in new ways, create shortcuts. If you really want to go down a rabbit hole of Gen Z, the ways in which they're customizing their home screens, creating their aesthetic, all of those pieces are really impressive. And also my mind immediately went to like, you would not notice if somebody put a new app on your phone if you did it this way. And so it would be, you can see if somebody is using spyware, it would be very, very easy to hide that app, especially because it's not going to say spyware. It's just going to look like another calculator app, another iPhone, another flashlight app. It's not designed to run prominently. Spyware apps essentially capture all the use of the device. So we're seeing what texts are getting sent, what's getting typed, what websites someone's are going to. And so it can be really scary. And very often some survivors are very quick to identify that that's what's happening or that's what's going on. And other folks will sometimes feel like, I feel like I'm losing it. How do they know where I am all the time? I'm being really careful. How do they know? And so we want to be thinking about like, are there pieces of this that the abuser would only know if they had access to the phone? The only way they would know I had a doctor's appointment, because I made that appointment over text and I didn't tell anybody I had it, was if they could see my text messages. Similarly, because spyware apps run in the background all the time, if we are seeing that, again, that sudden and unexplained battery drain, right? Get up in the morning, phone's at 100%, unplug my phone, take a shower, it's at 10%, and I haven't used it, or all of a sudden randomly high data usage because it has to run constantly in the background. Similarly, spyware generally requires, at some point in time, physical access to the phone. Some of the apps, some of the software are able to be re-downloaded through the cloud. So if somebody has backed their phone up and they went and got a new phone and they've installed everything that they had backed up onto their new phone, there are some apps that may carry over, but we're going to talk about kind of how somebody can think through the safety about doing that. But we might want to have a conversation. One thing that you can do to get rid of it is to completely wipe the phone and go back to the factory settings. That gets rid of everything on the phone. But, you know, we want to think about like, I want to save pictures. I want to save video. Maybe I have a voicemail on my phone from a family member that's passed away. I don't want to lose that. So there are risks in that sense. The other place that we run a risk of doing it is it could let the abuser know that the survivor now knows about the surveillance. And is that going to increase the risk for the survivor if the abuser knows that they've been found out? So there's a cost-benefit analysis conversation to have there. We don't just want to default to wiping the app or wiping the phone. Another option is to keep the phone for limited use. So I worked with a survivor who discovered spyware and GPS monitoring software on her phone. And so she knew that if she wiped it, it would escalate the situation. And so what she did is she began to use the phone she would have the phone on her when she would pick the kids up, take the kids from the house to school and from school to the house, because he knew where they lived and he knew where the kids went to school. That was not new information. But when she was at home, what she would do is she would turn the phone off. She got what they call a Faraday bag, which basically makes it so the phone can't get a signal out, and we'll put it in a drawer in the house. So there was just enough information coming through that he didn't know that whether or not she knew for certain. And then she went to find like a new or a safer phone. So wanting to think through, like, are there no contract phones that somebody could buy and use and put minutes on? Are there donated phones or phones from friends and family that they could use and add to their plan? Would that increase their safety if getting rid of the phone altogether or wiping the phone is not an option? Cameras. All of this to say that all of these are cameras. We are starting to see, and now especially cameras intersecting with smart devices, which we're going to talk about in the next slide. But the other thing just to say is that if somebody suspects that there is cameras in their home, one thing that they can do is to look for items or objects that are new or should not be there. If they can make a room silent, very often these the cameras will have like a very, very quiet but kind of high-pitched buzzing noise. And the other piece too is that there are detailed how-tos online. You can use your phone and use the flashlights and some other, and if you modify some settings, you can actually, it'll teach you how to sweep a room looking for the camera lens reflection. So there are pieces that somebody can do, but also to think about the ways in which cameras actually increase safety for survivors, right? We're hearing now that survivors are getting video doorbells because now they're going to know they'll have video evidence if somebody comes to their house. So really that double-edged sword, right, of we see misuse, but we also see how the use can keep survivors safe. So a smart device is just any device that accesses the internet. Alexa, Google, smart TVs, smart fridges, Nest thermostats. We have the ability to control them remotely. So you might be able to adjust your thermostat from an app on your phone. Baby monitors, similarly, sometimes you'll hear this called the Internet of Things, is another term that sometimes folks use. All of these are examples of smart devices. Smart fridges, there are the Tile, if anybody has seen those, are like little GPS trackers or little keys. And so if you lose something, you can pull up your Tile app and be like, where are my keys? Okay, here they are. Smart outlets, smart locks. So you can lock and unlock your house from a app on your phone. And again, all of these are designed not with the intention of surveilling. They're designed to make life easier. I love the idea actually of a smart fridge because I will never remember my grocery list when I go to the grocery store. I have been trying to do one for, I tried apps, I cannot, my brain does not work that way. I will not remember my list. I will not remember what I need. So one thing that the smart fridge says that they can do is you do your list on your refrigerator door, it syncs to an app on your phone. And if you're at the store and you open your app up, you can see inside your fridge. So if you're like, milk's not on the list, but I'm pretty sure we're out, do I actually need milk? You can look at the inside of your fridge through a smart home app. The challenge is that a lot of these are password protected, and very often we don't reset passwords. Or our password is something that's really common to us. And so I haven't seen one yet, but I do have a feeling that there will eventually be a case that we are going to hear of, because it will make nationwide news when it does, when somebody is found by their abuser and they were identified by the contents of their fridge because of a brand, because of a location, because of some food item that's in their fridge. And so again, these are items designed for convenience. We don't often think about the way they can be misused. So we want to think about, like, are we changing passwords? Who has access to it? Can we see who has access to that device and make sure that we recognize everybody that does? So there's a variety of ways, which we kind of already mentioned and talked through, that we see the exploitation of social media. Generally speaking, across any social media platform, these are our best practices. Making sure our location sharing is off on our phone. If we have to use it, authorizing individual apps as opposed to the default. Making it so we manually have to back up our cloud accounts. Adding in or building in two-factor authentication. That's when you put your password in and then they send you a text to put like a code in. So that way you get a notification if somebody's trying to access your account that's not you. If you feel comfortable and they feel comfortable authorizing and using biometric identification, so that's things like your thumbprint ID or your face ID, pluses and minuses to the biometric identification, because it could force somebody to unlock. But within an app, we could use that as a secondary part of two-factor authentication. My suggestion would be authorize it within individual apps as opposed to across the phone, because then if somebody just gets your thumbprint, they're in your phone. And also limit access to your phone's function. So apps will ask permission to do things. And so setting it to limiting phone access to phone functions. So setting like default to off or never, and only giving permission to like see your camera roll or access your location per time you use it. A couple things about password strength. So generally speaking, for survivors, we want the longer the better. We want different passwords for all of our accounts. do as I say, not as I do on that one, right? It's a challenge. But consider like sentences as opposed to words. And make sure it's not about, like, it's not an address, it's not a piece. And stay away, if at all possible, from single sign-on. So single sign-on is when I sign into Google, I'm signed into my Facebook, to my banking account app, to all of those pieces. Because that makes it so they would only have to get into one account and they're into all of the accounts. And then also logging out. We don't often think about that with apps, but it is just something to hold and to think about. Can I log out of this? Am I sure that I'm not leaving the account up on this piece? A couple things. Facebook has this great tool that lets you see what your profile looks like to other people. So it's a security check. And so that's a great tool for folks to use, and make sure that their security settings are as tight as they want them to be. And so my suggestion is, if somebody's going to be on Facebook, and sometimes Facebook is the only way to get that information, that would be my suggestion. Make sure they're running their security tool periodically. Zoom, we're all on Zoom. A couple things we can do to maximize safety on Zoom. Making a Zoom specific email. So this is an email I only use to register for Zoom. If somebody is concerned about being recorded, keeping their camera off so nobody sees their face or there's nothing in the background. You have the option to change your name in Zoom. Zoom will default to first and last name generally, but maybe using a pseudonym or an alias, or like first name or initials. And the other thing that everybody has the ability to do is to check the participants list. So if somebody is going into a Zoom, maybe like a Zoom family meeting or some sort of group call, and they're worried about their abuser being on it, keep their camera off, change their name, and then check the participants list. If somebody is using Facebook Messenger to communicate, that's a great option too. What we want to make sure they're doing is you want to make sure that their online status is turned off, so people can't see when they're online, and that their read receipts are off as well. So they can check the messages at their leisure. Similarly with WhatsApp. So WhatsApp, we know a lot of folks use to communicate when they've got family and friends outside of the country. One thing I will flag is that you cannot turn off your read receipts in a group app, in a group chat. So if somebody's in a group chat, people are going to be able to see that they're reading and checking those messages. And so again, thinking through that safety, who's in that group chat? Do you recognize everyone? Do you need to be in that group chat if you don't? Similarly with Twitter, Twitter is actually really great because you can hide a lot of your identifying information. You don't have to use your real name like on Facebook. You can limit who can message you, making sure your profile is set to private, and you can strip if you have, since the default is your info on, you can strip that and you can make it so it'll retroactively remove all of the information. And then our final piece is Snapchat. So Snapchat has like a real-time, what they call the Snap Map. It is in real time and you can see where you are. You want to put that sucker, my suggestion would be put that sucker in ghost mode. What ghost mode does is makes it so only you can see where you are, because otherwise and it runs in the background. So otherwise anyone can see where you are, and that can be really, really dangerous. And we want to be really mindful of that. So I know I saw some requests for the slides and for the PowerPoint. Absolutely, I will get those to Candace and we can share those out. The other resource that's really great, honestly, is to check NNEDV's Tech Safety Project. Has been really at the forefront, particularly working remotely, and remote advocacy has really, really been on the front lines of that and are constantly updating it. And the other piece that I would say is, if you have specifically questions about devices, you can find incredible resources with like how to step-by-step to check your phone privacy, to check your computer privacy, because those are so device specific that you want to make sure it's that way. And that's a way to share and to do it with somebody.